As I will get into now the full recap, all 52 teams. And yeah, one of the very few screens where you see a lot of green versus red for sure out of all the games this past weekend. As we start with Conference USA, we begin with some Tuesday action between UTEP and Kennesaw State. The Owls continue to win in conference and having one of the best seasons they have had in a decent amount of time. I know when they moved up from the FCS to the FBS, they were doing all right for themselves down at that lower level. But this season, they're obviously going bowling with a result like this that we talked about on Wednesday's show, 33-20 over the Miners. We keep moving to Jacksonville State, getting out alive there against Middle Tennessee, beating the Raiders 24-21. It looked like the Gamecocks were not going to get the job done there on the road, but make a nice comeback where, again, they win 24-21 with a game-winning touchdown. We keep moving to Missouri State, taking on FIU and beating the Golden Panthers 28-21 at home there. I was going to say on the road for some reason. Very close game. I was a -4 in favor of Missouri State. This was kind of one of those ones that I thought was like, I don't think this one's going to be so big in margins, but it's very interesting to see Missouri State favored, but they've been pretty good, and they proved it there by winning by 7. Technically, they cover for Jacksonville State, Middle Tennessee. The Gamecocks actually don't cover there. We keep moving to now a Friday night matchup between Sam Houston State and Louisiana Tech. Tech was favored by 17 points. They more than covered with a 55-14 result over Sam Houston State, who are still winless this season so far. I don't know where they will be able to get a win for the rest of the season, even in Conference USA, which is not a very good thing to say out loud. But for Louisiana Tech, solid performance. This one was just completely one-sided, and it's kind of what you expect from a game where you see a line like that. 17 points. Wow. Proved that right. And some. Delaware, they went over to Lynchburg, Virginia to take on Liberty. 59-30 was the end result. The only game that we got wrong in the conference, I risked it for the biscuit, and the risk did not pay off for us. Liberty was favored by 3.5 points. They more than covered with a 59-30 win, obviously, there. Yeah, we just thought the Blue Hens would have won this cockfight between them and the Flames. Doesn't turn out that way. What turned out good for us, though, the last one to talk about here for Conference USA, New Mexico State heading over to Bowling Green, Kentucky to take on the Hilltoppers. Western Kentucky wins 35-16. They were favored by 8.5 points. So obviously, if you do the math there, they more than cover, which is good for us because, yeah, this is probably one of the better, I would say, screens for conferences that we're going to be seeing for Week 10 as we now get into the MAC. Oh, actually, you know what I forgot to do? Here are the standings for Conference USA. As we mentioned, Kennesaw State having one of their best seasons ever. They are first in CUSA, 4-0 so far this season. Right behind them, Jacksonville State, also 4-0. Teams right outside that possible area where they can compete for the conference title. We got Western Kentucky, Missouri State, and Liberty. And I think that's pretty realistic in terms of who will most likely compete for that title again. Louisiana Tech has like the farthest outside chance. I don't see many of these teams ahead of them losing more than 2 games. So kind of have to hope that those teams ahead of them do fall eventually. But those are the standings for Conference USA. As we're going to keep on moving now to the MAC. And we're going to talk about some MAC Nation football here. There was only 2 games as the rest of the conference were all out with a nice bye. But for the 4 teams competing, we start with Buffalo heading over to Bowling Green and beat the Falcons 28-3. Yeah, this was just a massive disappointment for Bowling Green, who have been playing all right at home. That's kind of why we went with them. Obviously, we got it wrong. We should have won with Buffalo. They've actually been playing pretty decent, the Bulls, when they have to travel outside of New York. A -2 was the line being set between the two. So I was like, okay, I get why Bowling Green is favored. They're obviously home. They've been playing great. They beat Toledo, pretty solid MAC team. But man, 28-3, no offense whatsoever. And it is what it is. Central Michigan, they went over to Western Michigan to play the Broncos and lose 24-21. Western Michigan doing an excellent job and being in a decent position to play in Detroit for a MAC title still after that loss to Miami of Ohio, as they definitely been somewhat of a surprise. The last couple of seasons they have not been playing great. They've been losing games kind of inconsistently there in 2024 and 2023, but here they're steady as a rock so far. They were only favored by 4.5 points, so they didn't cover. But they do get the job done and getting a conference win there at home. As we'll talk about the MAC and their standings, even though there was only a few amount of teams participating for them this past weekend. We look now at the MAC standings. Here are there for us to see, as I got to scroll up a little bit to show us the MAC standings. We got Miami of Ohio, clear favorite, undefeated so far in conference play. You got Buffalo, who had an excellent weekend, obviously. And then Western Michigan as well. Both those teams, one loss so far in conference. And then you got Ohio, who probably has a decent chance also to get in there. I'm not too sure what the remaining schedules are for those three teams, but definitely will be the favorites to face the Redhawks there in Detroit. Outside chances, obviously Central Michigan, they didn't help themselves out by losing to Western Michigan, but they are only 2 losses so far this season. Same for Toledo, Ball State, and somehow Kent State 2-2 in conference play. As we don't expect them to win much of anything, but they have been even at a 3-5 record, somewhat of a surprise, because the last 2 seasons they've only won 1 game, and that was only against an FCS team. But those are the MAC standings, as we keep moving now into the Sunbelt. Fun Belt. Well, we did have a lot of fun with the results here, as we started with James Madison on Tuesday, which started off our week pretty right. 52-20 is the end result against Texas State. The Dukes kind of looking good now in terms of possibly getting into the college football playoff. If they run the table all the way, post to winning a Sunbelt title, they have a really, really good chance in punching their ticket to go visit one of those powerhouses there on the road. We'll see if they can be competitive like they were against Louisville earlier this season. But no, we'll have to wait and see, as they will have a few amount of games still left on their schedule. We have a Thursday night game. Marshall heading over to Myrtle Beach to take on Coastal Carolina. I was kind of surprised with this result, because not only was the Thundering Herd favored by 5.5 points, but they get kind of obliterated by the Chantlers 44-27. I was not expecting that. Marshall, they blew out Old Dominion, who is the second best team in that side of the division. But Coastal Carolina, week after week, we have been getting it wrong when we have to pick a game with them involved. This week, obviously, we got it wrong with Marshall. The week before, it was them at Appalachian State, where they won in Boone. Yeah, we got to pay attention to Coastal Carolina a little bit more. We keep moving to a game we got right, and the last one we'll talk about in the Sunbelt that we did. Old Dominion heading down to UL Monroe. They beat the Warhawks 31-6, which makes a lot of sense of why the line was being set of -17 for the Monarchs, at least the last time I checked. Old Dominion have a very outside chance. They kind of had to rely on James Madison losing 2 games in conference for them to represent the East. Most likely won't happen, but at least they'll get into a bowl game this season. We get to Louisiana. Oh, sorry, UL Lafayette. In my notes, I put Louisiana, but I still go by UL Lafayette. No matter what, the Raging Cajun, they do us dirty once again and beat South Alabama 31-22. We went with the Jags, who were at home and were favored by -4. Maybe we should have raised our eyebrows by it because it was only -4 at home. And South Alabama, what a complete disappointment this season. They have been playing close to teams well above them early in the season in non-conference, but once they get into the Sunbelt, they just keep losing games. And yeah, we got to stop picking South Alabama. But good for the Raging Cajun, as it was a nice bounce back win. Arkansas State, they went over to Troy and beat the Trojans 23-10. This was probably the upset of the weekend for the conference. I would say Red Wolves getting the job done again against the Trojans, who were favored by 7.5 points. Yeah, that is a lot of points in difference, and very disappointed for Troy. Man, they were kind of getting themselves to be the representative there in the West. Now they kind of have to make sure they win out, and hopefully everyone around them loses a game or two to for sure allow them to play against James Madison at the end of the season there. But for the conference standings, here are what that all looks like. As I'm getting the screens together. There we go. So here is what the Sunbelt Funbelt looks like. Starting in the East, James Madison ahead there, 5-0 in conference, 7-1 so far this season. Only losses to Louisville. Coastal Carolina is now in decent position to maybe, sneak in there. I kind of want to check, actually. Let's double check to see when Coastal plays James Madison. That is at the very end of the season. That's very interesting, as well as I gotta double check that. I'm like, ooh, that is going to be a big matchup. But again, the Chantlers have to win the rest of their games up until they play the Dukes for that game to truly matter. But for the West, it's now Southern Miss in pole position. Troy was there. They ruined their chances by losing to the Red Wolves again this past weekend. It's going to be interesting the way the West finishes it off the rest of the season. They're kind of I don't want to say the weaker side. I think they're a little bit more deeper on the top part because of, you're seeing Old Dominion, Coastal Carolina, Marshall kind of beating each other now. Versus the other side is kind of like more clear cut in terms of conference play. But that is what the Sunbelt Funbelt looks like so far here in week 10. As we keep moving now to a conference I just got belt to cheeks with this past weekend. This is one of the worst graphics I had to make this past week 10 out of all of them. The Mountain West just did us absolutely dirty. Starting with Army, heading over to Air Force and took on the Falcons and win 20-17. This is one of the slimmest margins in terms of lines being set. -1 for the Black Knights, which, at the end of the day, it was technically felt like a coin toss, a 3-point difference, as the Army technically covers, which is kind of wild. But this game, they basically led through most of it. Air Force was just trying to stick with them. And Army wins once again, which will set up a pretty interesting matchup at the end of the season against Navy. Because the game will actually have, for sure, a determiner of who takes home the Commanders-in-Chief trophy. As if it's like a 3-way tie, no one gets that trophy. Now that Army beats Air Force like Navy did earlier this season against the Falcons in Annapolis, when they play the midshipmen, that trophy will actually be going home with somebody. We keep moving to New Mexico, going over to Vegas and beat UNLV 40-35. And this was many of the Mountain West games that I got wrong, even though it's technically 3. But I was like very surprised to see. I'm like, wow, like New Mexico went down to Alliance Stadium and get the job done against the Running Rebels, who were favored by 4 points. Yeah, Ike, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, the new head coach there in Albuquerque for the Lobos, doing an excellent job so far in his first season as head coach. And yeah, I think I got to watch a little bit more of New Mexico. I know the game earlier this season when they made the trip to Boise, not a good result for the Lobos. I watched a little bit of that. But that was kind of the only game I've really kind of dabbled in. I saw glimpses of them versus UCLA. And so far this season, they have done an excellent job. And being bowl eligible, I believe, after the win here, or maybe they're one game away. Regardless, they are having a truly great season. I believe this is their first time would be going bowling since 2016. So New Mexico on the up and up somewhat. We keep moving now to Fresno State, going to the blue turf of Boise and handing the Broncos their first loss at home since 2022. I was absolutely devastated watching this game. Also, the milk can goes back to Fresno State with the win for the Bulldogs here. And it was kind of crazy because Boise State was favored by 17 points. Now, why would the result be 30-7? Well, Maddox, Mad Dog Madsen, unfortunately suffered an injury earlier on in this game. So Boise was in a backup scenario with the quarterback position really for the most part of this game, and that's why they were unsuccessful. Essentially, every single drive for the Broncos was basically a 3-and-out. And yeah, it's just completely disappointing. I think a lot of it has to do with the play calling for Boise and that offensive coordinator, Potter, who is taking the helm this season as the full-time offensive coordinator. Last year was the co-OC with Dirk Cutter, who has really been a massive miss. There's just been, I think, a terrible approach, to be quite honest with you, on offense. Not running the ball enough, not finding more creative ways to run the ball. And then on top of that, like Dylan Riley, who's one of the fastest human beings at the FBS level, very few amount of touches. And then on top of that, you know, what we were talking about going into the season for Boise, the lack of wide receiver depth. And we really saw it this past weekend as Chris Marshall, for some reason, I'm not too sure of the reason why he was not able to play, but basically had to take a week off, essentially. There was also Ford, who's kind of been the surprise guy for the Broncos. He was basically out now for the rest of the season before this game kicked off. So you're losing two guys that were basically somewhat go-to. You have Capel still, you have Henry, but that was obviously not good enough to help out their backup QB. Yeah, I think the offense approach, definitely at the end of the season, needs to be a change at the offensive coordinator position. That it is what it is, but that's kind of like where I'm like, if I'm going to finger point, that's exactly where the issues are, because the offense not only let down, obviously, the fans there, but their defense. Like, the defense had no hope whatsoever there in the second half. It was just basically Fresno State running the ball, which Boise should have been doing throughout this game, even with Madsen healthy. And that's just, again, it's a terrible offense approach. We've seen this from the start of the season with the loss there in Tampa against USF. I blame the same situation there of like, why are we overthrowing it? Why are we trying to play action when really we're not even running the ball in the first place? So it's like, how can you justify those kind of play calls? And it is what it is. Yeah, everyone knows, I guess, that tunes into the show, there's a reason why the room is blue. And when I see my Broncos lose, not only in general, but at home, it just doesn't happen very often. Like, it's BYU and UCF were the previous teams that beat us so far this decade. And Fresno State gets another one to add, which is not a common thing, technically. But it is what it is. We got to keep moving to now Washington State, Oregon State. I know this is technically not a Mountain West game, but we threw it in this section. Another disappointing result. Man, dude, Wazoo, what the heck? Do you know you had to play this team another time this season? Which is really weird to say. Regardless, Washington State goes over to Corvallis. They were favored by 3.5 points and lose 10-7 to Oregon State. Obviously, this game meant a hell of a lot more to the Beavers than the Cougs. Because Oregon State, this is now their first win against an FBS program this season. Second win for 2025. They will play each other again at the end of the year, which is, again, super weird. But yeah, dude, Wazoo offensive troubles once again plagues them. Game that we got right, San Diego State hosting Wyoming. The Aztecs win 24-7. They're obviously also favored by 10 points, so that's why we say a scoreline like that. And now are in a pole position because I believe they are now undefeated in conference and are the favorites to now possibly host the Mountain West Championship game. Boise does play San Diego State later this season, so it looks like we won't have a rematch, as if Boise loses that game. And for the foreseeable future, it looks like also Madsen might be out for an extended amount of time. So the quarterback situation, they're going to have to really lean into the run, and we got to stop getting away from I know I'm going back to Boise for some reason, but like if they can address that, or maybe even make a switch this late into the season of like who's calling plays for the offense. There's no hope at the moment, I think, going into that San Diego State game, who's been pretty good, pretty solid. Their defense there has had multiple shutouts. Last week they shut out Fresno State. They shut out Cal earlier this season, only giving up 7 points against Wyoming. So there's consistency there. It's really going to come down to how many points the offense can score. And that 24 points, that was more than enough against the Cowboys. A game I was super disappointed to see. I thought Hawaii was going to get the job done against San Jose State. 45-38 was the end result. Another one where we went against the grain versus some of the other ones that we have talked about. 45-38 again. Man, Michael Alejandro almost came in clutch at the end. It was basically like a one possession game there, and I believe San Jose State got the field goal to extend that lead, and I was like, oh, there's just another loss for us. But it is what it is. San Jose State was favored by 2.5. They more than cover. They're at home. I mean, they play pretty decent when they're the home team. To be quite honest with you, even though they lost to Central Michigan earlier this season in non-conference. And for Hawaii, they're just playing competitive football. They're bowl eligible, so there's not much more they can really play for the rest of the season after this loss. It's kind of just hoping that other teams in the conference lose so that they maybe have a very outside chance of playing for a title. As we're going to take a look now at the standings for the Mountain West here as I'm queuing up the screens. Going to get ready to now talk about what it looks like. And in first place, like I said, San Diego State, they are undefeated so far this season. 7-1. Only loss is to Washington State. Boise, 3 losses this season, but only 1 in the conference, which still puts them ahead of Fresno State, who have lost 2 games. Earlier this year, they lost to Colorado State and San Diego State the week before they get the big win on the blue turf. Hawaii, 3-2, again, an outside chance. If they get the win against San Jose State, they are looking pretty good to play for a Mountain West title, but now, again, they have to rely on other teams losing. Boise and San Diego State play later this season, so, there still is a pretty good chance for the Rainbow Warriors, but again, they got to win out. New Mexico, look at that. 3-2, 6-3 so far this season. They might be playing for a Mountain West title. Again, outside chance. Utah State still in the mix technically. I would say they have a slim chance of winning out for the rest of their remaining schedule there. UNLV, they basically have been burying themselves week after week. Lost to Boise earlier this season on the blue turf. It looked like it's going to be the Rebels and Broncos. Now it looks like it's going to be the Aztecs or Broncos playing maybe another team. Just depends on how the rest of the season cracks on. And then San Jose State with that win against Hawaii, somehow, some way, 2-2. They have to basically win the remainder of their games to play for that title, but obviously 3 wins away from being bowl eligible as well there, as that is the standings for the Mountain West. As we keep moving now to talk about what happened in the American. Well, we had a nice upset there in San Antonio on Thursday to start off the week. Tulane losing 48-26. The Green Wave were only favored by 4.5, so it seemed like it was going to be a close affair. Well, it kind of wasn't. Total disaster there for Tulane. And we'll see the standings. You know, they're not in the worst position. They just don't help out their situation to play for an American Conference title, because really what they would have liked to have done is maybe lose to Memphis next week, but still only have that 1 loss. But now that has the real opportunity to have 2 losses on their conference schedule with a result like that. We keep moving to Rice hosting Memphis. Tigers get the job done 38-14. They were favored by 14 points. Yeah, Rice, probably the worst team in the conference. Them and UAB probably competing for that title, even though UAB beat Memphis. But regardless, Memphis gets the job done. UAB headed up to the Northeast to play UConn in some non-conference action. The Blaze lose 38-19. Yeah, UConn, 11.5 point favorites. They more than held that up. And the Huskies doing a pretty decent job in recovering off of a very rough start to 2025. UAB, on the other hand, they have been kind of going back to themselves after that that win at home against Memphis. We already talked about Air Force losing to Army, so let's keep moving to Navy losing to North Texas in Denton. The Mean Green were 6.5 point favorites. That wasn't the reason why we picked North Texas in this one. We picked them because they're the highest scoring offense on average this season, and we knew that Navy had a very outside chance to keep up with that offense, and they didn't. 31-17 was the end result between the Mean Green and Midshipmen. Navy will have a game against Notre Dame, so they might have 2 weeks in a row where they have a loss after coming off of an undefeated season up until this point. North Texas, they're in decent position now after their big win, handing Navy their first loss. I think the Midshipmen probably loses another game. We'll look at their schedule real quick when we look at the conference's standings. As the final game to talk about, East Carolina versus Temple. Pirates were favored by 5.5 points. They more than cover with a 45-14 win in Philly. This game, for some reason, I thought I picked Temple. And then when I was going back and reviewing and setting up the graphic for the show, and I was like, oh, good thing I had picked East Carolina, because obviously not a very good week for us in general after coming off of one of our best weeks in week 9. But for week 10, it was so rough that I was like, oh man, I think I did pick Temple. And then I go back and I look at it like, okay, never mind. We're good, guys. We're good. We finally got a win. But for East Carolina, yeah, it's a good result. They've been playing all right. They beat Army earlier this season at home. Played North Carolina State pretty well, but obviously lost in that game. But so far in the American, they've been losing some. They've been winning some more than losing, I would say. And they get a good result on the road against the Owls. As we're going to take a look now at the standings for the conference. As this is what the American looks like at the moment. We got Navy still in first place after the loss, but again, they have a decent amount of games to play still. They most likely lose again, unfortunately, this upcoming weekend against Notre Dame. For Memphis, they are still in the race here. Only 1 loss is to UAB. Obviously, they beat USF earlier this season, so that kind of gives them the leg up. For North Texas, still in it, and that helps them out with beating the Midshipmen this past weekend. For Tulane, they suffered their first loss. Also, just like Navy in conference, to UTSA, as I was trying to remember who they played. Which it makes it such an interesting scenario, because USF now looking like, okay, well, we have more than enough chance to possibly play for a conference title. And then look, East Carolina 3-1, 5-3 so far this season. And then again, Temple, UTSA, they're probably now on the most unlikely to play for a title, even with just 2 losses so far this season. But I want to take a look at Navy and their remaining schedule. I know they had USF, so it might be 4 weekends in a row. They got Notre Dame, USF, and Memphis. So most likely the Midshipmen don't finish on top, which means, you know, Memphis has a really good opportunity to punch their ticket in. Actually, I kind of want to look at who they play, because I know obviously it's Navy. They already play USF. East Carolina, that might be a very tough game. And then obviously Tulane, that we already mentioned earlier on the stream. North Texas, they played USF already, got blown out at home already. They probably have the easiest track. You got UAB, Rice, and Temple. Very, very winnable games. And obviously with that offense that scores so many points. Tulane, we already talked about them playing Memphis. They will have FAU, Temple, and Charlotte. So that's somewhat of an easy schedule, barring, you know, Memphis there still left. Then for South Florida, it's UTSA, Navy, UAB, and Rice. So, you know, the Roadrunners, they've been surprising, especially with the win against Tulane this past weekend. But so far, that is what the American looks like here in Week 10. As we keep moving now into the ACC. Now, we did see how the Mountain West went for us. For the ACC, I thought that was what our picks were going to look like for the Atlantic Coast, which didn't turn out that way. I think we did all right. Obviously got more wins than losses, but definitely too many losses, to be quite honest with you. But it is what it is. As we start with that weeknight matchup between North Carolina and Syracuse. 2 of the worst teams in the conference, for sure. Unfortunately, Syracuse has basically fallen off. I can only imagine what they where they would be right now if Steve Angeli didn't suffer that season-ending injury. They could possibly be playing for a conference title somehow, some way. Here at home against North Carolina, they hand the Tar Heels, I believe, their first win in conference this season, as the Orange go down 20-10. Yeah, it is what it is. We get that one wrong. We thought Syracuse, out of all the games, for them to win for the remainder of their schedule, Tar Heels would have would have been a slam dunk, or at least a layup. Didn't turn out to be that way, as Bill Belichick gets his first win in conference. Moving on to a game we got right, and we're very happy to get it right, as Miami were 12-point favorites. They're in Dallas against the Ponies of SMU, but they lose 26-20. I believe it was SMU's first AP top 10 win since like 1978, if I'm not mistaken, or it's around the early 80s or late 70s. I just can't remember what that graphic said when I saw it, which is, you know, obviously good for the Ponies. Not good for Miami, as it's now their second loss in conference. For SMU, though, this is just a nice bounce back win after losing to Wake Forest last week. We keep moving to a game we unfortunately barely got wrong, and that is Duke on the road against Clemson. Clemson were 3.5-point favorites. We thought, you know, pretty good shout for them to beat Duke, but it ends up not going our way. 46-45 was the end result. Look, Clemson just slipped. That they should have won this game. They were ahead by multiple possessions. They're late, but the Blue Devils with Mensa, man, that was just an amazing comeback there in South Carolina. And the Blue Devils also are in a decent position as well in the Atlantic Coast Conference, as a lot of other teams lost. Even though I think the earlier L to Georgia Tech doesn't help them out, as they would need the Yellow Jackets to lose another game or two to make sure that they don't have that tiebreaker not go their way. But in decent position. We move now to Louisville winning in Blacksburg, Virginia, against Virginia Tech, 28-16, handing the Hokies a loss there in the conference. Favored by 10, so it makes a lot of sense of why the end result is 28-16 there. I think those points from the Hokies though came in a little bit late as well. Notre Dame heads up to Chestnut Hill to play Boston College and won 25-10. Fighting Irish were favored by 28.5 points, so it's very eyebrow raising when they only win by 15. It's almost half of what was expected between the Irish and the Eagles. So yeah, hopefully they don't fall later this season. They will be playing Navy, who they most likely beat there in South Bend for week 11. Pitt, they headed over to the West Coast to play Stanford. And this is kind of the one where we were like, okay, we were risking it with SMU Miami game. But for this reason, why we went with Stanford, again, East Coast teams have not been playing so well when they got to travel to the West Coast. And that was kind of what we were going with. But Stanford loses 35-20, which is kind of interesting. Pitt were favored by 14 points the last time I checked. And it looks like they cover, at least for that line. But yeah, Stanford, they had an injury, I believe, from one of the running backs going into this game. So maybe I should have flipped it, but I didn't have technically the opportunity because we made that pick on Wednesday. It is what it is. Virginia, they had also head over to Northern California to take on the Cal Berkeley Bears. And they win 31-21. They continue to win in conference. So far this season, they're undefeated, even though they lost to NC State. But that was a non-conference game. And they covered as they were favored by 4 points with that trip on the other side of the country there. The upset kind of the weekend, I would say it was even more of an upset between SMU versus Miami, because I'm not surprised about that result. But this one between the Wolfpack and Yellow Jackets, 48-36. Yeah, it's a bit of an upset for the Wolfpack there in Raleigh. Georgia Tech was favored by 5.5 points. It's kind of been trending that they would maybe lose a game like this, possibly because of their struggles earlier this season. But they've been getting out alive with a lot of games, and great teams get out alive. This time they could not against North Carolina State. Kind of want to go back and see the highlights of this one. I didn't have a chance to, but yeah, just very surprising. Of all the games that Georgia Tech would have lost for their first conference loss and then loss in general of the season, as there are now only 4 undefeated teams remaining, I wouldn't expect it coming from NC State. But also, again, NC State beat Virginia earlier this year. Florida State, they hosted Wake Forest. This game was a bit like how Stanford played Miami last week. Somewhat of a close one. And then the Seminoles just pulled away late in the second quarter and then win 42-7. Florida State was also favored by 9.5 points. But yeah, we got that one right between, again, the Seminoles and Demon Deacons. How the conference looks like after the Week 10 games for the Atlantic Coast Conference. Well, it looks a little bit like this. The 2 top teams there are Virginia and Georgia Tech. Somehow Pitt is there also with a 5-1 record. They lost to West Virginia earlier this season. So if they're one of the representatives in the Atlantic Coast Conference, it's not going to be looking good for the league. You got Louisville, 4-1 record. Only loss this season is to Virginia. SMU also 4-1. So this very somewhat deep in terms of possibilities of who can play in the conference title game. And then also behind them, Duke 4-1 as well. 2-loss Miami. They're now having to hope that other teams lose in the conference, as that'll wrap out kind of the teams competing for the Atlantic Coast title. Man, this one's going to crack out pretty interesting, just like the American. I would say a lot of possibilities of who can play in for the remainder of the season, but we'll have to wait and see who actually gets to play. I would say they would want, a Georgia Tech maybe, especially if they can somehow, some way beat Georgia, but that most likely doesn't happen. I guess Virginia would be like the better hope. Louisville as well, to play for a conference title between those two. Miami now losing 2 already in conference. I mean, they could lose another one. They don't play good outside of the state of Florida here in 2025, as they're 0-1. And they have a couple other games, I think in the Northeast. And then Duke somehow, that would just make Tulane's win over the Blue Devils earlier this season look even better, as a lot of people forget that they played each other. And then SMU technically would be a good look for the Big 12 if they were to play for a conference title again. But that is what those standings look like. As we move now into the Big 12. Did pretty good, I would say. It is what it is with some of the ones that we got wrong. As we start with West Virginia upsetting Houston 45-13. The Cougars at home were favored by 13.5 points. Only loss this year was to Texas Tech. Now they lose to the Mountaineers, which is pretty interesting. I think the last time West Virginia made a trip down to H-Town, they lost, but they get one back on Houston there. Baylor, they hosted UCF and beat them 30-3. Kind of not surprising, but somewhat a little bit technically, because Baylor's defense hasn't been so good. Only give up 3 points, so that's a good result. We move now to a game we got wrong there in Ames, Iowa, as Arizona State surprisingly beats the Cyclones 24-19. As we have some bad news to talk about in the news section about the quarterback situation, but the quarterback that started, Sims, gets the job done. Iowa State was favored by 7.5 points. There was a lot of injuries going into this for the Sun Devils, not only at the quarterback position, but their key weapon out wide, Jordan Tyson, was not available, but somehow, some way, they get the job done and don't count the Sun Devils out, I guess, somewhat for a possible title. Defending their titles, or I'm trying to go with what I was saying there. Very much an outside chance, but they kind of have to rely on other teams losing for that to actually happen. We move on to one we got right there in Manhattan, Kansas. 43-20 is the end result between the Wildcats and the Red Raiders, who win on the road and continue to win in the conference. Only losses to Arizona State so far this season. They're in Tempe, but doing all right. This game, pretty much what I expected. Scoring a lot of points. They shut down Avery Johnson. Had no issues with him. Somewhat, only giving up 20 points for that defense. Kind of acceptable, especially on the road. And they will meet up with BYU there in Lubbock for Week 11. Kansas hosted Oklahoma State in a win 38-21. I believe Kansas was favored by 7 points. Oh, no, sorry, 25. I read the wrong one on that. They don't cover, which is kind of surprising, somewhat. But we could kind of expect Oklahoma State to get a fight in there by the end of the season. They have been winless for quite a long time. This deep into their schedule. I think you have to go all the way back to the game against Abilene Christian in Week 1, if I'm not mistaken, is their last win. Haven't been winning too many games the last couple of seasons, as they are still winless in conference and are at the very bottom in the Big 12. We move to a blowout there in Boulder, Colorado, between Arizona and the Primetime Puffs. And it's another weekend where the Primetime Puffs get absolutely obliterated. This time it's the Wildcats who bear down there in Boulder, 52-17. And yeah, not looking good for Coach Prime and his program. As you can't be losing by this many points back-to-back weekends, but kind of as expected, I guess, as they haven't made the right quarterback decision or switch yet. Continuing to go in with Salter, who will most likely not be the guy, and that's kind of what happens when you pick up a guy that is a decent prospect in the portal but doesn't figure offense whatsoever. We move now to the other blowout in the Big 12, and that was between Utah and Cincinnati. 45-14 was the end result there. No points in the second half for the Bearcats. Very disappointing, but it is also Sam Eccles. Not a lot of teams win there. You know, Texas Tech earlier this season, but they're at the top of the conference. Last year it was BYU. So again, not a very common thing. Does happen at times, and Cincinnati is not the one that gets it done. Utah was favored by 9 points. Kind of the reason why I guess I should have paid attention to that a little bit more. I think at the line the beginning of the week it was at 7, and it was keep on rising. I was like, damn, that's so disrespectful for Cincinnati, who has, you know, a pretty solid quarterback. I think they had a running back issue with injuries there. Maybe that was the difference, but obviously the defense giving up 45 points. Can't be doing that if you want to be considered a top team. As this is what the Big 12 standings look like so far after the game there in Salt Lake City. BYU still at the top, undefeated in conference play. They will be playing Texas Tech as the top two teams, kind of putting themselves in better positions with a win there. Cincinnati, after that loss, still in third. Yeah, 5-1. It's the first loss in conference play so far this season. Second loss overall. Houston, 4-2. Yeah, kind of crazy as they lose to West Virginia. Utah making a better case for themselves, but again, they have to rely on other teams to lose for them to get in, which is not good because the other teams that beat them is Texas Tech and BYU, who are at the top. Arizona State has a very, very slim chance looking outside there for the Sun Devils, but it helps out their chances with a nice win there in Ames. And then TCU, who had a bye week, they are 3-2. They basically have to win out and rely on other teams losing as well. But if I'm not mistaken, they play Utah this year. I'm not too sure about the BYU or Texas Tech. I think maybe they do play Texas Tech. Actually, let's just look at that real quick to clear up that. Yeah, they play BYU, Iowa State, Houston. Oh, they don't play Utah. Oh, that's a little disappointing. Anyways, they do play Houston, and so they have a decent amount of games that they win out. That, who knows? We could be seeing the Horned Frogs play for a Big 12 title, which hasn't happened since 2022, right? Yeah, when they played in the national championship and got blown out by Georgia. But we keep moving. Now into the Big 10. We got one wrong. Not too bad, not too bad. We start with Penn State versus Ohio State. 20.5 points in favor for the Buckeyes. I believe they more than cover, if that math is right. Game was pretty close to begin with, especially going into halftime, but Ohio State made the right adjustments and get the job done with a 38-14 win. We keep moving to Illinois, hosting Rutgers. They beat the Scarlet Knights 35-13. Illinois was favored by 12 points. That warranted for sure, as they more than covered there at home and kind of get back into the groove. It looks like they don't have the best of chances to get into the playoff, as they'll be already a 3-loss team. But I've seen crazier things, but we'll have to wait and see. We have Indiana blowing out Maryland next up, 55-10. The Hoosiers were favored by 22 points. A lot of big lines being set here. Anyways, but yeah, Indiana, best offense I think in the country, does what the best offense what I think in the country does, with a big 55-point line set there. Next up is Minnesota playing Michigan State. They win 23-20, 3.5 points for the Golden Gophers. So I think technically that is not covering. But yeah, they get a nice win, somewhat in contention. Obviously, there's a very outside chance that Minnesota gets in. Most likely not. Regardless, though, they are bowl eligible for sure, which is a good thing. And we keep on moving on to not the best of results for Michigan at home against Purdue. Boilermakers putting up a pretty good fight there. I thought this would have been a blowout, just like some of the others that we've seen in the conference. As the Wolverines were favored by 21 points. Well, they only scored 21 points and give up 16. So yeah, they don't cover. A little surprising. Similar to what the result between Notre Dame and Boston College was in the ACC. But they continue to win. I think they're ranked in the AP. Don't really think it's warranted. Like, who has Michigan beaten? Well, they've lost to USC and Oklahoma. But outside of that, again, who has the Wolverines gotten an impressive win over? You can argue Nebraska, but they'll probably lose a couple more games for the remainder of the season, as we have some unfortunate news for them. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. Nebraska hosted USC. This is the only game we got wrong. We risk it for the biscuit for the Cornhuskers, as they were 6.5 point dogs going into it. The Trojans win 21-17. They technically don't cover there if you know the math. But yeah, USC got out alive there in Nebraska. Again, some more unfortunate news for the Cornhuskers once we get into the news section, as we're going to take a look at the conference standings, and that is what I'm kind of interested in looking at. Because more or less not for the top teams, but for kind of the teams outside. Because those will be the programs possibly playing, not for a conference title necessarily, but get into the playoffs somehow, some way. We start with, obviously, Indiana, Ohio State. 2 of the 4 teams remaining undefeated. They most likely play for a conference title in Indianapolis later this season. But we have to talk about Michigan, who are 5-1, 7-2 overall again, but who have they beaten? Oregon, 4-1, 7-1 in the conference. Actually, I kind of want to see who Oregon plays. I know they obviously play Washington, but I think USC is on that schedule. Yeah, USC, Minnesota. They got Iowa on the road. That's going to be pretty interesting. I think Oregon probably is that number 3 team to get in. You have Iowa, who has only lost 1 game so far in conference. That was to Indiana, and that was a very close affair. USC 4-1. You know, they'll have Oregon. I would put the UCLA as a game that they could possibly can lose. They have Northwestern on a weeknight game at home, and then they also have Iowa at home. So realistically, I probably see them lose, 2 out of those 4 remaining games, to be quite honest with you, which is so much of an improvement. I mean, still another not high standard season, but it is Lincoln Riley and it's USC. Minnesota, again, very outside chance. They have 2 losses. They don't probably get in for sure to the conference championship game. Same thing for Northwestern and Washington and UCLA. I think last week we're kind of looking at those 2 lost teams are it is possible, but again, is Ohio State, Indiana going to lose a game? Most likely not, because Ohio State just has Purdue, UCLA, Rutgers. Those are very easily winnable games by a large margin, and then Michigan, which they have to get over the hump. And then for Indiana, the remainder of their schedule looks pretty good. They have to go to Happy Valley. I think in the beginning of the season, that looked like a very tough game, but a very winnable game. And the line for that one, which we're going to talk about, is very large between them and then the Indy Lions. And then Wisconsin, Purdue. So they have the probably easier track, to be quite honest with you, versus Ohio State, technically. And then other than that, yeah, Michigan, Oregon. Maybe Michigan, squeezes in there as a number 4 team. But again, they will probably lose to Ohio State. They have Northwestern and then Maryland for the remainder of their schedule. For Iowa, we already talked about them, in USC. They also have Nebraska. So that number 4 team, which I think is very possible for the conference to get in, looking all right. As we keep moving to now the final conference to talk about, which we did go perfect for last weekend. This weekend we are 50-50. We start with Texas hosting Vanderbilt. They win 34-31. A nice big win for Texas. Kind of keeps them alive. Therefore, I don't want to say a title game in the SEC once again, but to possibly get into the playoff once again, 3 years in a row. I don't think there's that many teams that have been doing that lately, to be quite honest with you. Which would be a good thing for Sark. I know he's not winning the championship or getting super deep, even though it was a semifinal last year, technically. Regardless, I think he's been so far a decent success. There's also rumors of him moving up to the next level, which is pretty interesting. But we'll have to wait to see if anything like that happens. But a big win against Vanderbilt, who are also looking from the outside to possibly get into the playoffs still. Georgia, they beat Florida 24-20 in Jacksonville for the largest cocktail party in the world. And the Bulldogs keep rolling there as Mississippi State, I believe, gets their first conference win in a very long time over Arkansas, 38-35 there in Fayetteville. Arkansas looks to be the worst team in the conference, if I'm not mistaken, because we see Kentucky beating Auburn there. But one we get right. It's nice that Jeff Lebby gets a win there. We keep moving now to South Carolina versus Ole Miss. 30-14 is the end result. Ole Miss favored by a pretty big margin, the most out of any of the SEC games, 12.5 points. Well, they more than covered there. A little bit of a hump to get over there in the first half, but obviously get the job done. One team that did not get the job done, Tennessee at home against Oklahoma, 33-27 is the end result. Tennessee were only favored by 3 points, which is pretty interesting. And unfortunately, they don't help us get it right. Oklahoma throughout most of this were leading. They did a pretty good job. In terms of getting John Mateer the right amount of time. I thought he would have had some struggles, but I also think maybe the Volunteers had some injury woes. Not only in the secondary, I think Carter, one of their defensive ends, rushers, was going into this game questionable, so not everyone was also healthy. I'm not trying to make excuses for Tennessee, but that also could have been a factor of why Oklahoma won this game, 33-27 there. We keep moving to Kentucky, beating Auburn at home 10-3. This game, pretty ugly scoreline, not a lot of points scored. Auburn was also favored by 11 points, as Kentucky has been putting up some pretty good fights. I mean, they took Texas to overtime. It was only a single-digit margin between them and Ole Miss. So they've been playing pretty good football, but not obviously getting the job done. But they do get the job done here, 10-3. And as a result, another firing in the Southeastern Conference. Hugh Freeze has been let go, and we'll talk about him here in a little bit. But before that, we got to talk about the standings in the Southeastern Conference. And that begins with Texas A&M, who had a nice bye week, still in first place. Alabama also undefeated in the conference. Only one loss is to Florida State, but we'll forget about that. Georgia, 5-1, still trying to get in contention to compete for a Southeastern title and defend it. But, they obviously got to get to Texas and hope that Alabama or Texas A&M loses a game or two there. Ole Miss, 5-1, very small margin to possibly get in. I don't think they play Alabama or Texas A&M for the remainder. Yeah, they have the Citadel, Florida, and then Mississippi State. It's kind of weird how these top end teams aren't meeting each other, but it's just scheduling for the SEC there. Texas also 4-1. What could really help them out is obviously beating Georgia, which is going to be a tall task, and then doing it against Texas A&M again back-to-back years. They probably have the toughest road, but if they win out, they definitely get themselves into that conference championship game. Oklahoma basically all but done in terms of trying to get in because of the amount of teams at the top with their records. Same thing for Vanderbilt and Missouri there, who has only 2 losses. As that is what the Southeastern Conference looks like.